here's some cool models, but here are the products that we made with those models. I'm very frustrated that a lot of the big providers, starting with OpenAI, Anthropic today, and also Google, are deciding not to give the raw thinking tokens out of these reasoning models. What we're hearing from the teams behind the scenes, not only are they releasing it as they're announcing it, they're literally releasing it a day or two after they finish it. You've touched the nerve, right? That sets me off. Watch out.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So this week I was at Google I/O and I met my great friend Sam. So we were going to be talking about some of the stuff that we saw at Google I/O. Also, some of the model releases this week, especially the Claude this morning. So make sure you watch the video till the end. Hey Sam, how are you doing?
I'm good. We're here in town for Google I/O, Google's big week. A lot of new stuff, a lot of things to talk about. Where do you
Yeah.
want to start?
What do you think about it? Like, how do you feel about I/O?
It was really impressive this year. I got to say that I think this year was probably more impressive than perhaps the previous 2 years. I think we really saw this year the sort of fruits of a lot of the groups inside of Google that have been working on things that they kind of perhaps presented in preview, things like Project Astra, stuff like that we saw in preview last year. But this year it was like really cool to see things like that. Literally, Sundar sort of say, well, later today you can open up Gemini Live, you can play with it, you can do stuff. So I think that was a really cool theme.
Yeah, at least like we're not waiting for things anymore, right? Like they are releasing it as they are announcing it.
Literally, from what we're hearing from the teams behind the scenes, not only are they releasing it as they're announcing it, they're literally releasing it sort of like a day or two after they finish it.
Yeah.
Sundar made a really interesting comment at the start of the keynote that you're just as likely now to see a model drop on sort of an average Tuesday in the middle of March as you are to see them hold it for Google I/O. And I think that that's really interesting because we've certainly seen that happen, that you and I are both testers for the Gemini models and stuff like that. I'm on brand today with my Gemini top. Certainly we've sort of seen that like over the past, 6 weeks, month, there've been multiple releases of Gemini. And it did have a lot of people sort of wondering like, oh, what are they going to release, right? If they've been releasing all these things in along the way, what's left kind of thing.
That is true. Well, apart from like in all the models that were released, what were your favorite things? Not just the models in general.
So for me, the big idea, that I made a video about yesterday and stuff like that was that this I/O was really about sort of models versus products. So I kind of feel not just Google, but across the industry over the past 2 years, everyone's been like, oh, here's our new model. Check out the benchmarks, check out the, all these sorts of things. And while that's been really cool, it's been focused on very sort of technical stuff for those of us in the industry, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I felt that with this I/O, it moved beyond that to like, okay, here's some cool models, but here are the products that we made with those models. And for me, that was something, I had already sort of going into it, knowing a lot of the things that they were going to announce. I was still surprised just by like how good the products were when you actually saw them, how good the reactions were to those things. And it seemed that there was a lot of excitement, not just around that we've got a new Gemini Flash model or a new Pro model coming, but the products that people are actually building with those.
Did you get to try any of the products?
So I've tried out quite a number of the products already. Yes, like I think they're like a wide variety of products.
Oh yeah.
If you want to sort of break it down, I guess we could start off by talking about the sort of Gemini products. So that was like there's a bunch of different coding things out. You already made a video about Jules.
Yeah, Jules.
So what did you think of that?
It's pretty interesting idea. So they say Jules is the asynchronous coding agent, right?
Right.
So far we have been using like Cursor or Windsurf. The idea is you're basically babysitting these tools, right? They'll generate code. You need to accept this, right? Jules is, I think, one of the first, or I would say like there's a new category. Codex is another one. Devon is another one, right? You give it a task. It's going to go in the background, complete the task, and then just tell you that okay, here's a PR, right? So I think this is what the agentic coding system was supposed to be, right? And we're actually seeing that. So this is pretty neat to actually see the realization of what was promised.
Yeah, I did think it was very interesting that sort of we had OpenAI try to preempt everyone last
Yeah.
Friday. Uh, Last year they did it on the Monday before I/O, trying to steal Google's thunder. This week it was the Friday before, I guess because we also had Microsoft do a big announcements on Monday. I I agree that like clearly a lot of the a lot of these frontier labs have been working on this idea of agentic coding, of coming up with some kind of software to do it and stuff like that. OpenAI rolled theirs out on Friday. Google announced Jules at I/O. It's going to be really interesting to see where they go with this. I think at the moment it's still kind of limited into what you can do with it, the number of agents you can have going, the number of calls and stuff like that. So it's perhaps a little bit still of a tester kind of.
Yeah, I think it's like more of an early iteration, right? And then
Right.
hopefully they're going to get a feedback from the community and improve on that, right? But you alluded to like a number of model releases. This week seems to be pretty crazy, right?
Totally, yeah. Maybe we'll come back and talk about the other people's models, but like
Oh
just
yeah.
at I/O, we had just model wise, we had a new version of Gemini Flash 2.5, right? Which is, if I think about it, is now the second or third public iteration of
Yeah.
this model to come out, going right back to sort of December. I think it was back then they were calling it the thinking model. It's really interesting that so Demis announced that okay, this is going to go GA probably in June. The the interesting thing is that just the number of iterations that Google's done on this, that was really fascinating. On top of that, they announced a new version of Gemini 2.5 Pro, with deepthink. So this is sort of your, even more of the test time compute, perhaps in parallel, perhaps doing a bunch of different things. We had Gemini Diffusion, which is really interesting.
Excited about that.
What did you think of that one?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating idea. I think that will open up. Like the first thing is it's going to be extremely fast, right? And I think
It is, yeah. Like I've been playing with it, and you can get up to sort of like 11, 1200 tokens per second. You're sort of averaging, I think 900. It is insanely fast. It's not the smartest model out of all of them, and Google was quite honest with that.
Yeah.
That hey, this is an experiment. We're not even sure where people are going to use this, but is this something that's really valuable to the developer community? I certainly think it will be. I think it's going to be really big for agents. We're going to see people use this because you can imagine one of the things that people haven't really talked about it is that you can imagine combining this with the code execution server side, where it can literally in a split second decide that, oh, I need to write the code, run the code, return the response to the user in sort of like seconds or fractions of seconds, really, for doing that. I think that one's going to be really big to sort of see as well. So there definitely was a lot going on with the Gemini models.
Yeah, and I think like even it kind of shows that the Google's philosophy is changing, right? They're not just waiting for a model that is fully developed, right? They're really experimenting with things, and especially like some of the demos, like live demos. That was, I think, an interesting thing to see.
Yeah, we certainly saw like Gemini being used for a whole bunch of different things. We talked about the Project Astra. So the other sort of Gemini models that got announced were sort of a new version of the Live API.
Yeah.
Originally, we used to refer to it as the BiDay API, the bidirectional API. This now, allows people to just speak to Gemini in real time, and not only that, have video feeds. And I think that's going to be huge, right? And going back to my point earlier on about that it wasn't just models, so they showed that, but then they showed that like, okay, that's going to make its way into the Gemini Live app, and that's going to be free on Android and free on iOS for people to use. And I think like while a lot of people were kind of wowed by it there, my guess is over the next couple of months, we're going to see people just start using this thing.
Yeah.
Right? It's literally going to be like anytime you have any sort of issue or something like that, people are just going to pull this out, show it to it, say, hey, help me here. Or, hey, this is, they showed some really nice examples of things like where Gemini can be incorporated into search again with these kind of things. Sort of just pull out your phone, take a picture of these sneakers, and say, "Hey, go and find the best price on the web for this kind of thing for me, and tell me what it was." Um, and the thing was, that like you can see that while that's a really playful thing, we took a picture of Sundar's sneakers. And I won't tell you how much they cost, but if you go and sort of do some research, pretty nice. But they also things like you're just going to see people using it for lots of different things. Everything from kids' homework, through to work uses, to a whole bunch of these different things in that app. And then also sort of making its way to search. So search was one where clearly the Gemini 2.5 models are now starting to make their way into search. Google obviously is known for search. Everyone's been sort of saying for the past year, oh, all these other companies are out innovating Google. I got to say, Google sort of showed that actually they've, in search, they're still probably the number one player, right? Not just on volume, but on innovation as well.
And even like the like I'm really impressed by the amount of progress that they have made, right? From the initial Bard to Gemini 1 or Gemini 1.4, and it's been fascinating to see, right? Now I do want to ask you something. I think we both were at Next. They were talking about AI,
Right.
agents, right? They even had a counterfeit how many times those two words were used. This time we didn't hear about agents.
So definitely there was a lot less talk about that. I did find that really interesting. Certainly Google, it wasn't like that they had no announcements about that. ADK, the Agent Development Kit, which we talked about when we were in Vegas, that is now up to 1.0. There's been a bunch of changes for that. There are a number of new built-in tools for that framework that they've released, and that are coming. Some of those are still coming down the pipeline. That brings us back to another use of the Gemini model that we didn't talk about, was Mariner, right? So that was, I guess, the agent story here was more of a consumer story than sort of perhaps even a developer story.
Yeah, they're converting it to basically a product, right?
Yeah, so it looks like Project Mariner, which again sort of was announced last year as a preview thing coming later in the year, later on got released as a Chrome extension just for testers. Now it looks like this thing is coming out. You can get it on the Ultra package or whatever that's going. We can talk about the video models in a sec. But for me, the interesting thing there was that clearly this is the future.
Yeah.
Right. Clearly this is going to be built into people's browsers, built into their phones, and we're going to see this whole sort of thing of, getting these whether you want to call them agents or assistants, probably in some ways assistants is perhaps a better word. Getting these assistants to actually just go out there and do stuff for you. Now that's I think a really big leap. Is that people have talked a lot about learning from these things or getting them to sort of aggregate information for you, but now they can going forward they're going to be actually going out there doing their own searches, getting things, taking actions that you want it to take. And I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I think like we as consumers or users will have to really adopt to this new paradigm, right?
Yeah, like it'll take a bit of time, for sure, and we still sort of yet to see, it wasn't like they announced that this is 100% in Chrome today release kind of thing. So there'll be some iterations probably before it comes out. But one of the big takeaways that I would say from that is that they probably couldn't do that last year. In fact, I could tell you they couldn't do that last year because the models just weren't at the right level then, right? So for the fact to sort of get those models to this point now enables all these products.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things where there was a lot of ideas around products, last year and before that, but the models just weren't good enough. And it wasn't that Google's models weren't good enough; it was everyone in the industry. And so over the past year, people have improved their models. All the different providers and stuff like that, and that's enabled all these new things. And we haven't even touched like VO or image
Oh
jam where
yeah,
we
yeah.
go and
I actually so everybody's talking about VO. I don't think we need to talk about that because that's really fascinating, right? I do want to ask you about Gemma. What did you think about that? I think that that's a very important piece which is not getting a lot of
okay,
attention.
so this was kind of delegated to the developer keynote in the afternoon. Um, Certainly a very interesting model. Again, probably more interesting, not because of any of the specs about it,
Yeah.
but because of what you can do with it. So the Gemma 3 release was a couple of months back. That had everything from sort of a small 1B text model right up to a 27B multimodal model that could only do images and text.
Mm-hmm.
So interestingly, they released these sort of mobile versions or the nano versions. This is what the 3N is.
Yeah.
And it can do audio and and images. And we've seen like demos of where people are starting to make the sort of like the Gemini Live app
Yeah,
fully local on a phone, right? That's kind of
that's
it's nuts.
crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like you will be able to run all these things on your mobile phone, with like your privacy is going to be preserved, right? It can be pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, and I think one of the cool things with that, talking to some of the Googlers behind it, is, that they even don't know exactly all the use cases.
Uh-huh.
They're interested to see, okay, where will developers use this and how will developers use this? And I think that's going to be really fascinating. The obvious one is stick it in a phone and let people use it on their phone. But my guess is we'll probably see really cool things that people are going to develop for their laptop or for their desktop for using this, where it can just watch you as you're using your screen or something and can comment on it. You could even sort of customize these models to do a little bit of the computer use stuff where, so all of that is fascinating. It sounds like they're just getting started with this. There are a whole bunch of technical things around these models that are really interesting about how you can resize them. And from what we're hearing, that this is just the start,
beginning,
right? This
Yeah,
is just the beginning for
so
this.
some more cool stuff are going to be coming in. What do you think about model capabilities? Like, for me, it feels like we are able to do more and more with much smaller models now.
Yeah, I think look, we've definitely crossed this bridge of where ideas were really cool last year, but they just didn't work in the models, to now where suddenly, oh yeah, this can work. And it doesn't mean it's always going to work perfectly yet, or for every use case. But more and more people are able, coding is a huge one. So like we talked about Jules, but the other one was Stitch. So where basically can use these models to generate a design for an app, and I got to think that, looking forward, you're projecting out sort of 6 months from now, a year from now, us as developers, I don't want to use the word competing with, but we're going to see like just people just with a good idea be able to come along and build an app.
Yeah.
Even though they've never learned to code, they've never learned, any of this stuff. I think that's going to happen. Whether, depending how quick and stuff like that, that's going to be, something to see. But it is interesting that Google's kind of planting a flag for some of these apps, now with the Gemini 2.5 model. So that means that they are giving good outputs and stuff like that. A lot of it, I think they want to sort of see like, okay, how are people going to use this?
Yeah.
Right. We've seen some really nice demos, for example, of people building apps just by talking to it.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I want a mobile app. I want it to be, lime green. I want the corners to be nicely curved, or all this sort of stuff.
I think people with ideas are going to be the one that are going to sell it. Right?
Yeah, like okay, we won't talk about VO too much because I guess it's like everywhere. But that for me was the big takeaway with VO3, right? Was that the model is awesome, right? So we're talking about a model that can not only generate really unbelievable video now, but can also generate the audio sound effects to go with it, the music to go with it, and the dialogue. Right?
That was fascinating.
That was cool, but also the whole idea of them not just, they could have just put that model out.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what would have happened in the past. So in the past, they showed sort of VO, basically with the model. This year, they put out like this new product called Flow. And the idea, of the Flow app is that really it's taking these models and, allowing you to make like a full movie with it. And I think that's really fascinating. I want to see like the 5th season of Westworld that never got made, right? Someone's going to go out there and make that. And I got to think like you can imagine all the sort of Star Wars or Star Trek fans or all this. We're just going to see people make all this sort of stuff. Now, there may be issues around copyright, that kind of thing. But my guess is that you will also see really, cool stories that just couldn't get made because it would cost too much to make before. It would have been too technically difficult, that kind of thing. So those are things going to be really interesting to see. We already sort of attended a thing with Darren Aronofsky and Demis Hassabis talking about this whole stuff. And it was really interesting to hear Darren Aronofsky talk about that, it's really about the storytelling. And this enables different storytelling that you couldn't do before. So for me, looking at it as a sort of technician and knowing how the model works and, like, wow, it's such an impressive feat of technology. But it's really cool to see other people just look at it as like, oh, wow, this is an awesome tool that I could, do a movie with or do something like that.
Yeah. And actually, I was in a session with Demis. He talked about, like, somebody asked him about the future of the future capabilities that he may be looking at, right? So something he mentioned was very fascinating, that today we are building tools, giving those tools to the LLMs to decide, but in future they're going to be looking at these LLMs or models building tools on the fly, right? What do you think about that idea?
So in many ways, if you look at it, that's kind of what I was talking about with the diffusion Gemma and code execution. That thing can write code so quickly that if it's got the ability to execute the code, it could just literally decide, right, I'm going to ping this API or I'm going to use this MCP. Write the code, do it. If it doesn't work, update the code, do it again, all in the matter of sort of like a second. For doing this. So yeah, I think he's totally right. I don't even see that as being a hugely future sort of thing, right? I think at least the beginnings of it. Certainly going forward, we may see the more intelligent models, your 2.5 pros, those kind of models, get really good at sort of working out perhaps sort of scientific tools that that we haven't even thought about yet. Like, that's going to be really interesting.
So that means, I guess, like, we will not going to need one model for everything, but we're going to have multiple different models with different capabilities doing different things.
It could be that, or it could just be more sort of like the one big model with lots of different prompts or lots of different agents running the whole thing. Definitely the diffusion one, the speed of that, it just inherently gives it properties that that your 2.5 Pro with deep think that can think for tens of minutes, hours, or whatever it is going to be quite different. I do think though that this whole idea of these things creating their tools and stuff like that, giving them a sort of sandbox where they can run code themselves, so it's not dangerous to anyone outside of. That's going to generate a lot of interesting things. We saw just, I think it's last week, DeepMind announce Alpha Evolve. Right, this idea of having a model or a set of agents generate ideas, having ways to test those ideas, and then update that loop, and then just spin that loop faster and faster. And I know, like, talking to a lot of the researchers, that they see that as being sort of the path to discovering the cure for cancer, and that being the path to discovering new physics issues and things like that.
Yeah, a lot is happening, right, in the field, and I think we're going to see more and more innovative ideas. What do you think about all the different releases that we saw this week?
So,
or maybe even last week, right?
Yeah, like we kicked it off. I flew into San Francisco last Wednesday. I had a day and a bit to get over jet lag, and then sure enough, Friday morning, OpenAI was kicking it off with the Codex release. On Monday, we had Microsoft with the Microsoft Build and new Copilot stuff. Obviously, Tuesday and Wednesday has been mostly Google and Google I/O. We've also had just literally maybe an hour before we were recording this, Claude, Anthropic dropping Claude 4. It certainly, everyone seems to be wanting to jump in on, that no one wants to get left behind.
That is true, but like, give us some time, right? We have the
Yes. Exactly. For you and I, like trying to, cover it or evaluate it and make a video about it or something, it's frustrating.
Right.
It would be nice if they just spaced them out, so it was
Exactly,
like
right?
one a week for the next 4 weeks. Unfortunately, that's not how it's going to work.
Did you get a chance to look at Claude 4?
I did have a quick play with Claude 4 when it came out and look at some of the things that they announced. I thought there's some really interesting things in there. One, they also announced that whole idea of code execution. So AI Studios had that for quite a while now.
Okay.
Most people haven't, talked about. I know you made a video about it. I made a video about it a while back. I remember you talking about when people were talking about the whole strawberry, how many R's in strawberry thing. You got around it by using the code execution, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's good to see that Anthropic has also adopted that. They've also adopted some other tools. One of the things we saw at I/O on Tuesday was that the Gemini API is also going to basically support MCPs. And Claude, the Anthropic API now is also doing that. And it looks like they're doing that server side. That is really interesting to see where that goes.
So something which I'm noticing is there seems to be convergence in capabilities, right? And every provider is basically doing the same thing now.
Yeah, I think it's not just convergence in capabilities of the models, but convergence in the sort of add-ons.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
If you think of the add-ons as being search, being code execution, being some kind of tool use or MCP kind of thing, pretty much everyone's got that now.
Yeah.
Like I think OpenAI was the first one to have code execution quite a while back. Google introduced it. Again a while back. So yeah, like there is this sort of feeling that a lot of the add-ons, as I'm calling them, are kind of at least the obvious ones. Everyone's going, oh yeah, we need to have that, right? Oh yeah, we should have that, as well. That perhaps the sort of other one would be the sort of computer use or spinning up a browser in the cloud kind of thing. They're really we are seeing some kind of convergence around some of these ideas. Yes.
So something which I personally have strong opinions, and I think you also have. There is also this convergence on how they're enabling reasoning traces, right? So now they're summarizing it rather than giving us like the actual raw reasoning.
Okay, so you've touched the nerve, right? That sets me off. Watch out. I'm very frustrated that a lot of the big providers, starting with OpenAI, right through to it looks like Anthropic today, and also Google along the way, are deciding not to give the raw thinking tokens out of these reasoning models, but to give a summary of it. And they're trying to claim that, the summary is kind of, it's nicer, it's more useful and stuff like that. But it's nowhere near in depth that you actually have from the real model. One of the things that I found so impressive about Gemini 2.5 are those raw thinking tokens. And unfortunately now they're gone, right? Google may bring them back. Interestingly, Anthropic kind of said like, well, we're going to give you the summaries, but if you really need the raw tokens, contact, sales and maybe we'll work something out kind of thing, which is good because I do think there's probably use cases where people don't need it and there's use cases where people do. So having that ability to, if it's going to cost you a bit more, fair enough, right? That makes sense. But yeah, that's an interesting thing. You got to see this as a defensive play from all the big companies. They don't want the DeepSeeks of the world. They don't want some of the other players that are out there being able to use their models for distilling their models to train other models and stuff like that. Totally understandable.
Yeah, but from a developer perspective, what would be like some of the use cases? Like, why would we be interested in this?
So for me, one of the big things that I've been using it for up until recently that I found so useful were things like when the raw thinking tokens make a plan, right? It sort of says, okay, I'm going to do this first, I'm going to do this second, and it comes up with a really nice plan. You can actually then take the outputs if you're using it sort of as an agent or something, and then use the whole thing via an LLM as a judge to actually look at that plan and see, did I get everything done on the plan, or did I leave something out? And that loop of going through and doing that just makes your agents much better, makes them more reliable. It's just a really, a more impressive experience. So far, all the summaries haven't given us that kind of, information. Perhaps we see a better set of summaries that do.
Yeah.
Like I certainly don't see the summaries as something that's fixed in stone. Talking to some of the people on the teams, I know that they are still looking at, okay, how would you want to use it, how could we make it better, that kind of thing. So but I think there are a lot of uses of the thinking tokens. Also, I just find it fascinating to read these things and see how the model's kind of like thinking, I'm putting in inverted commas there, how it actually sort of thinks through the various steps.
You can learn a lot from that, right? Like I personally really enjoy like going through it, and actually there might be some ideas you never thought about it.
Yeah, like one of the big uses of it is that when you can see those thinking steps, you can see whether your prompt was guiding the model properly or not.
Yeah.
So if you see the wrong kind of thinking steps, or you see that, oh, it's trying to go this direction too much, you can easily go and sort of update your prompt to get it back on track. Without those, that becomes harder to do.
Okay. Well, Sam, thanks a lot. It was a fascinating discussion. I hope the viewers also enjoyed. Do check out Sam's channel. I hope like everybody is subscribed, but if not, he has an excellent channel on all the technical content. I'll be making some of deep dives on some of the products that were announced at I/O, as well as the Claude and some of the open source models that were announced. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.